Chapter 1. The leadership principles that help the U.S. Navy SEALs achieve extraordinary results can be applied in any area of life. After the Vietnam War, the U.S. military experienced over 3 decades of no sustained combat operations. During this period, the vast majority of U.S. military leaders had no real, substantial combat experience. Many sectors of the U.S. military often see these as the dry years. As personnel who served in heavy combat situations in Vietnam retired, their combat leadership lessons disappeared into oblivion. Everything changed after the horrific terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001 launched America once again into sustained conflict. The years of continuous war and brutal combat operations in Afghanistan and Iraq led to the rise of a new generation of leaders in the ranks of the U.S. military. There are tons of war stories among this new generation of combat leaders, and after years of successful operations, the Navy SEALs have aroused the public's interest and gotten a great deal of attention. Extreme ownership was born in an attempt to capture the leadership principles that have brought the U.S. Navy SEALs such an enormous success. Jocko Willink and Leif Babin's lessons during their days as leaders of various SEAL task units aren't just applicable to teams on the battlefield, they apply in all leadership situations. Any team, organization, or company in which many people come together to achieve a goal and accomplish a mission can utilize the SEAL leadership principles to lead and win. In this summary, you will learn the guiding principles and mindset that help SEAL combat units and SEAL leaders achieve outstanding results. Chapter 2. To lead a team to success, you must take responsibility for each and every one of its failures. One of the authors, Jocko Willink, was commander of SEAL Team 3's task unit Bruiser during the Iraq War. In 2012, Jocko Willink and his unit were in Ramadi, Iraq, when they were suddenly met with heavy fire from what they thought was the Mujahideen, or enemy insurgents. It wasn't the Mujahideen at all. As it turned out, it was another SEAL unit, and in the utter confusion of the friendly fire, a soldier lost his life. And in the outcome of the event, it became clear to Jocko Willink, being the ranking officer in the operation, that everything wrong was his responsibility. And guess what? He was actually able to save his job by taking ownership of this terrible event. Jocko Willink was allowed to keep command of his unit, basically because unlike most business leaders, his superiors knew that every leader makes mistakes, but only the good ones take responsibility for them. The significance of the commander's attitude is also pretty evident during the worst-case scenario training that SEAL teams undergo. Most of the units that perform below par during such operations have leaders who blame either the situation, their subordinates, or the entire troop. Simply put, they fail their missions by refusing to take responsibility. The SEAL units that perform the best in training are led by commanders who readily take the blame, seek out constructive criticism, and meticulously take notes on how to get better. When leaders shy away from responsibility, the consequences can be far-reaching. In Jocko Willink's experience, for example, when a poor SEAL leader criticizes everyone but himself, his subordinates tend to mirror that bad attitude and then do the same. This leads to the team becoming ineffective and incompetent in carrying out their plans. Instead of adapting to and finding a solution to the dilemmas that inevitably arise, such a team just makes excuses and passes the buck. In the same vein, the subordinates of leaders who take total responsibility mirror that behavior themselves. Consequently, accountability and initiative disseminate down the chain of command. Leaders must take responsibility for everything in their world. There is no one else to blame. Jocko Willink. Chapter 3. Understanding the importance of your mission will help you execute it successfully. When Jocko Willink was told by his military commanders that his top-notch, exquisitely trained SEAL team would be joining forces with the new-sprung Iraqi army, his first reaction was, hell no. He felt the Iraqis weren't properly trained, horribly equipped, and were sometimes disloyal to their American allies. In spite of this, he kept all negative feelings to himself and didn't share them with his troops. How come? Well, he had to figure out why the plan was being implemented before speaking out against it. It turned out that including the Iraqi army in Navy SEAL operations was actually a strategic move designed to ultimately facilitate the retreat of U.S. forces from the country. Once he was aware of this, he could believe in the mission and convince his team to do the same. So, he went ahead and passed his conviction on to his unit. They were also able to commit to the mission and help carry it out, once they too understood why the mission had been assigned. However, Jocko Willink would have suffered a massive backlash from his team if he had questioned the mission outright, and openly voiced his objections to his unit. Even if he had later known the reason for the mission and tried to persuade them to support it, their doubts probably would have remained and the mission may have failed. As a leader, you need to be a true believer in the objectives of your team. So when you get an order that appears problematic, you should try to see how its purposes might align with the bigger strategic goals of the organization you work for. After all, as a leader, you're a part of something that's bigger than both you and your team. If you don't understand the reason for an assignment, it's your responsibility to seek explanations from someone higher up in the chain of command. Questioning your superiors about why a decision was made can be frightening, but a failure to acquire this strategic knowledge means avoiding your responsibility, a move any great leader must avoid at all costs. Chapter 4. Do not treat your allies as competition. Treat them as a support network. While on a mission in the deadly city of Ramadi, Iraq, the SEAL unit of Leif Babin, one of the authors, landed in the heart of the enemy territory with no backup. To get out, they had no choice but to risk walking through the city in broad daylight. Luckily enough, the team made it back to the base unscathed, even though the chances of an enemy attack were sky high. After the mission, Leif Babin found out that he had made a mistake. There was another SEAL team close by that could have given backup to his unit. However, he had been so focused on the problems of his own team that he totally forgot to ask for help. Thus, he failed to use one of the most basic Navy SEAL tactics, cover and move, which primarily implies work as a team. The idea is that to achieve the overall mission, every element must work together and help all the others. In the case above, Leif Babin totally forgot what the other SEAL units were doing and how they could work together because he was so myopically focused on his own unit's objectives of evacuation without injury. Hence, he had put his team at higher risk than was necessary. So whether it's in a military or the corporate world, leaders have to keep one eye on the mission at hand and one on the broader organization, including other teams that might provide strategic support. For example, in Leif Babin's work as a business consultant, he once noticed a fierce blame shifting and competition between different teams within the same company. They were clearly disregarding the cover and move tactic. Internal teams need to support one another and bear in mind that the enemy isn't internal but external. Simply put, the lady in HR isn't the competition, but the other firms who are trying to steal your clients are. Chapter 5. To stay effective under pressure, set clear priorities and act upon them. It's the middle of the night in Ramadi. The SEAL team has just left a building by moving on to what appeared to them as the roof of the next house. This roof, however, turned out to be nothing but a tarp, and one SEAL fell through the covering and landed 20 feet below, wounded and imperiled. The unit itself is very exposed, deep in enemy territory without backup, with a wounded comrade and an enemy bomb on the way out of this building. In this situation, naturally, many people are competing for attention at once. That's why it's the responsibility of the person in charge to stay calm and decide on the best possible course of action. To get this done, Leif Babin recalled a particularly useful principle from his SEAL training: prioritize and execute. To keep this principle at heart, SEALs verbalize it in the mantra: relax, look around, make a call. Even highly skilled leaders will grow overwhelmed if they try to tackle every issue concurrently, which is why it's crucial to decide on the top priority and focus on it. Once that problem is solved, the leader can shift their focus to the next priority. In the case above, Leif Babin's first priority was security. His second was attending to the injured soldier, and his third priority was taking a head count of all his men. He managed to do his job despite the intense pressure by taking a mental step backwards to assess the situation calmly. Business leaders can use a related strategy. You probably won't find yourself in life and death situations in the business world, but you can still profit from prioritizing and executing. In any given circumstance, start by assessing your highest priority. Once you've done this, simply and concisely relate this priority to your team. Then, solicit input from key leaders around you on the best way out of the predicament at hand, and lastly, concentrate your team's resources on effecting this plan. Subsequently, you can move to your next priority and repeat the process. But bear in mind that as priorities shift, you need to be sure to communicate the change to your team too. The basic truths at the core of extreme ownership: there are no poor teams, only terrible leaders. Jocko Willink. Did you know? SEAL is an acronym for sea, air, and land. SEALs do not only specialize in naval operations. They are trained in every skill that can come in handy on any battleground, in any environment. They can operate in the desert, on the sea, and in the jungle. Chapter 6. Planning for success entails comprehensively identifying and mitigating risks ahead of time. Moments before the launch of a SEAL task force to rescue an Iraqi hostage who was being held by al-Qaeda, Leif Babin was told by his intelligence officer that the hostage was not only surrounded by bombs, but also guarded by bunkered machine guns. The operation's risk level skyrocketed immediately. Nevertheless, Leif Babin carried on as planned because he had already anticipated this extra danger and prepared for it, even before he knew it existed. As a SEAL unit commander, Leif Babin already knew there was a high possibility of such dangers arising. To do anything other than this would have been to ignore his total leadership responsibility in the situation. Factoring such possible hazards into the overall plans he had made and outlined for his troops was simply due diligence. Indeed, while planning the operation, he had put in place some measures to mitigate the risk of potential explosives and machine guns around the target. Therefore, due to this meticulous planning, there was no need to make a new plan or delay the operation, despite this substantial new report. Such preparedness is so important that Leif Babin often employs this scenario while training SEAL recruits. He asks them a tough question. Would you still have executed this mission after discovering these risks? And the right answer is always yes. Regardless of context, leaders should always take the time to map out a detailed plan that identifies, quantifies, and decreases all known possible risks. Making such extensive emergency plans helps lessen risks in the future because every person in the operation knows precisely what to do if things go out of hand. This makes success more probable since your team is prepared for any possible occurrence. But remember, there will always be some risks that can never be mitigated, which is why good leaders focus on the risks that can be managed. Chapter 7. Rather than resent the intervention by your superiors, make sure you're giving them the information they need. During Leif Babin's and Jocko Willink's military service in Iraq, Babin would frequently burst into Willink's office, demanding to know why he kept getting series of emails from their commanding officer, asking what Babin referred to as stupid questions. Leif Babin would ask why he was being bothered and if the commanding officer was not aware that he had many important things on his plate. To these questions, Jocko Willink simply responded, "No, because you're not taking responsibility for telling him." Leif Babin would eventually realize that the superiors weren't psychic. They were only asking about his operations because he hadn't given them enough detailed updates. Simply put, the commanding officer was just trying to get the necessary data he needed to approve Leif Babin's plans himself, pass them up the chain of command for final approval, and let Babin carry out his combat missions. Leif Babin learned an important lesson from this realization. He had to stop his own negative attitude and do his best to present highly detailed operation planning reports to his superiors. However, many leaders in business don't know that this is important to sustain good relationships with their supervisors. Many leaders think their own boss is at fault. They aren't giving them the support they and their team need. But what they really need to do is remind themselves that it's their own responsibility to provide the crucial information their bosses need to make decisions and give them support. A good leader always makes sure there is proper awareness of a situation both up and down the chain of command. Taking absolute responsibility as a leader involves leading and inspiring every person around you, whether they're a higher up or a subordinate. Taking absolute responsibility as a leader involves leading and inspiring every person around you, whether they're a higher up or a subordinate. Conclusion. Whether in a military or business setting, it's essential that you take total ownership of your team and its work as a leader. Doing so means taking responsibility for both the successes and failures of your team. You must readily take the blame for the team's missteps, seek out constructive criticism, and meticulously take notes on how to get better. When a leader criticizes everyone but himself, his followers will mirror that bad attitude and then do the same. And in effect, the team will become ineffective and incompetent in carrying out their plans. Rather than look for ways to solve the problem at hand, such a team simply wastes time making excuses and playing the blame game. Likewise, if a leader readily takes responsibility, the followers will do the same, and accountability will disseminate down the chain of command. Taking total ownership of your team also entails making detailed plans that account for uncertainties and keeping tight lines of communication in all areas. Try this. For effective management, decentralize your command. Generally, no one can effectively manage more than 6 to 10 people directly. Nevertheless, many corporate executives manage much bigger teams. Here, the Navy SEAL management policies can help. First, break your team down into sub-teams containing about 5 people and assign a leader to each. Ensure these leaders have adequate knowledge of the larger team's overall mission as well as its ultimate goal. Then, commission your junior leaders to make decisions that help achieve that goal on their own. This structure works well without stressing you out personally.